All right, everybody, we're going to get started here in a minute or two. It is muted. Okay. All right, there we go. All right, thank you all for sticking around for the A-Team Discipleship Hour. We're going to be in the book of James this morning, right? The letter from James, James's epistle. A quick description of James. James was the half-brother of Jesus. Shortly after the time of Jesus, James rose to prominence at what may have been the very first Christian church in Jerusalem. Obviously, it was a highly persecuted church. Braylon kind of spoke on that issue a little bit this morning. And church history tells us that James was beheaded by order of King Herod of Agrippa in AD 44. A little background to James's letter. As opposed to writing his letter to like a specific church, as Paul did for the most part in the New Testament, James's letter is addressed to the church as a whole, right, or followers of Jesus as a whole. The whole book of James revolves around one core idea, that genuine faith results in obedience to Jesus' teachings. That true faith will always result in fruitfulness. That's a huge theme that James is trying to push in his letter. So I'm going to read the second half of James chapter 1, and then we're going to focus in on the last verse of the chapter. But this will kind of give us some context, and if you listen closely, you'll see that theme that I just described really come through. James 1, 19 through 27. Hearing and doing the word. Know this, my beloved brothers. Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away, and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Okay, so James is quite clear in verses 19 through 27. True faith will result in obedience to the word. I love the analogy he uses in verse 23 and 24 about the mirror. That someone who listens to the word, right, or the message of Jesus, but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his own face in a mirror and immediately forgets what he looks like. Later in James chapter 2, James will even say that faith without works is dead, right? And this is kind of a highly debated verse, which we can speak to here. Now, does this mean that we are reconciled to God by our works? Is that what faith without works is dead means? What do you guys think? What's he mean there? What do you guys think he means?
If you don't have any good works, somehow the connection with faith wasn't made. The connection with God isn't what it should be.
That's exactly right.
Ephesians 2, 8 through 10 talks about being saved by grace, not of works.
Mm-hmm.
Then it goes on to say in verse 10, to do the good works God has prepared for us. No works would be a sign that
Right. Yeah, so what James is saying is that faith is the root, right? Faith is where it starts, right? And that's what equals salvation and fruitfulness as a Christian. Go ahead, Kaljean. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so if we're reading James, and as I kind of told you guys what the theme was, right, it's easy if we aren't looking in the view of the whole New Testament and the whole Bible as a whole, we may start to lean in that direction, right, that what I do is going to equal my reconciliation to God, but that's not what James means here, right? What he means is that true faith will always result in fruitfulness. Okay? So what James means is that authentic faith will lead to obedience. Right? Not perfect obedience all the time, but it will lead to some kind of change in your life. If there's no real faith, right, if you haven't actually heard the word and accepted it, right, if you haven't done that, then it's no surprise when you don't see any fruit. But if you have done that, there is going to be some kind of change in your life, some sort of fruitfulness in your life. It's impossible to hear the word, accept it, and not have it change how you act. Go ahead, Andy. You know what? I think I've heard that. Yeah, didn't he make, Corey, maybe you remember, he made some sort of quote that he thought James was the least valuable letter. Yeah. Yeah. Which, Luther was great and all, but he may have misinterpreted what James is trying to get at here. So now let's focus on verse 27 for the rest of our time together. I'll read it one more time for us. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Now, the first thing I want us to notice about this verse is that the verse is not giving us a command. The verse is actually offering us a description. The verse isn't commanding us, it's describing something to us that is authentic and pure. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, right? So he's giving a description of what it looks like. The word religion James uses here isn't referring to what immediately pops into our heads when we think of religion, when someone says religion, like one of the major world religions, that kind of pops into our head. But in the Greek, this word is actually the Greek word threskia. And I have a definition for us here. The definition of threskia is an outward expression of faith or a demonstration of something that is inwardly true. Did you catch that? The outward expression of faith or a demonstration of something that is inwardly true. Pure and undefiled. What do you guys think James means here by pure and undefiled religion? That's probably part of it. Corey? Right. Really good, Corey. Genuine. Yes, I really like that. Right? It's authentic. It doesn't have ulterior motives. Right? You're not, as Corey kind of said, you're not doing it to earn something, somehow earn God's favor or something like that. Mike? Right. Right. We're under obligation, as Paul would say. Right. So, really good points. But yeah, it doesn't have ulterior motives. It's not self-indulgent, is what else I have here. Right. It's not self-enhancing. Right. It's pure. It's humble. It's authentic. So an outward display of authentic and true faith is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Orphans and widows. In the ancient world, these members of society were considered worthless, basically. They were ruined, right? They had no hope. Essentially, they were unable to provide for themselves, is kind of what it came down to. They couldn't protect themselves. They couldn't provide them for themselves. They were just, they weren't protected. Mhm. Yeah, really good. Yeah, that's the call. So orphans and widows for James would symbolize the most vulnerable in our society. Who would you guys say are the most vulnerable in our society? Has it changed much from orphans and widows? Are there new people that we can think about? What do you guys think? Who should we be thinking about when James talks about the most vulnerable? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So we have children continue to be vulnerable, and now they're vulnerable to being taught things that are self-deprecating, right? That are going to hurt them in the long run, not benefit them. Anybody else? Mm-hmm. No, that's a really good one. Yeah, because in an ancient context, that probably wouldn't happen to you, right? You'd have to be taken care of by your family, right? You'd be in a little town. You'd be in a town, right? They wouldn't send you somewhere, right? You'd have your family until the end.
What about the not yet born?
Yes,
I mean, they are really vulnerable, and we kill off
maybe the most vulnerable. Hmm. Yep, maybe the most vulnerable. Right? They can't say anything, right? So. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, both sides. So, yeah, again, people being lied to, right, and being deceived. Homeless. Homeless is a big one. I'll have a statistic I'll say later that'll depress you. But yes, homelessness is a huge issue, especially in Denver, actually. So, huge problem. It's everywhere. Every big city has it, right? So, and orphans and widows still, right? But we have maybe some new ones in our, depending on what culture you find yourself in, you're going to find these people are most vulnerable. And that's what that's what James wants us, he wants us to be thinking about those people. Right, the poor, foster children, struggling single mothers, those are the most vulnerable in our society, and the different ones that you guys mentioned as well. And then he says, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. What do you guys think James is talking about here? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Right. You got to have a foundation somewhere else that you can rely on.
Well, it fits exactly to what Raylan was saying.
Mm-hmm. It really does.
Citizenship is not in the world. It's not of the world. I mean, we're here, but we're not those things. That would certainly fit James.
Yeah. And we have to constantly remember that. Constantly be reminded. Right? I get reminded of it every Sunday when I come in here. Remember where my foundation is. Any other thoughts? Anything specific? Remain undefiled by the world or unstained from the world. Mm-hmm. Good point. So, a couple notes here, right? To avoid evil in the world, to remain pure of heart, to not watch what you shouldn't be watching, not go places you shouldn't be going, right? All those things are going to be temptations. But I had another thought, and it was because I was listening to a Christian apologist the other day, and he said something I found really interesting. He said that the biggest problem with a society that doesn't believe in God isn't that people stop believing in anything. He said the bigger problem is that they will believe anything. Right, I'll say that one more time. Right, the biggest problem with a culture like us that is kind of losing belief in God isn't that people stop believing in anything. The bigger problem is that they will believe anything. The bigger problem is that they will believe anything. There will be no solid ground to stand on when it comes to ethics and moral behavior. Right? Whatever your culture says is the right way to behave will be the way you behave. Right? You will have no foundation to test what the world is telling you against. Right? What you will believe in is whatever is trendy in your cultural moment. Right? Whatever's trendy in your cultural moment, or whatever your cultural moment believes to be moral and ethical, you'll just accept. Right? Because that's where you found yourself. And it's changing all the time, right, depending on where you are. So another facet to keeping oneself unstained by the world is to stand on God's truth and don't be tricked into believing whatever your world believes, or really whatever your world has just decided to believe in that cultural moment. But I think James may also be getting at something else as well, that having faith that is authentic and acting it out actually has a purifying effect on us. When we are focused on caring for the most vulnerable among us, we don't really have a ton of time to worry about carnal desires or our worldly affairs because we are focused on the brokenness of others. Right? When we're dedicated to acting out our faith, a lot of those things kind of fall to the wayside and don't distract us, right? Because we're focused on Jesus' mission for us. To quote from James Johnson, who's the director of church ministry initiatives with the Christian Alliance for Orphans, he puts James 1:27 in his own words, and this is what he says. One of the purest and most undefiled demonstrations of the gospel is to see hard places and broken people and to move towards them, not away from them. Why do you guys think this is the purest and most undefiled demonstration of the gospel? Mhm. Mhm. Yes, exactly, Corey. Really good. So yeah, what Corey said is that's because that's what God did for us, right? That's what Jesus did for us, right? He moved into our brokenness instead of away from it. Um, and that's just a demonstration of what he did for us. Mike, did you have something to say?
It also involves courage. Even if it's on a level of just getting out of the comfort zone, have that frame of mind get us out of our make us
Mm-hmm. Right. I think it really does. And do you think, especially in our culture, you said avoid. Do you think it's pretty easy for us to avoid it now? It's probably easier than it's ever been. Because what can we distract ourselves with? Anything, right? Tons of distractions. I mean, yeah, that's one of the biggest issues, right? We don't have time we can totally distract ourselves and miss the hurting people around us and the devastating parts of our world. Like we can sit on our phone, sit on our TV, watch the football game, and we can just forget about it. Yeah, yeah. And then we don't have to think critically. We don't have to think critically about anything. Right, I've heard many theologians say, right, that one of the biggest problems with all the distractions we have is ancient people used to sit around and used to think, what's the meaning of my life? Right, why am I here? What should I be doing? Now, we don't ever have to be alone thinking about those things. We can just turn on the TV, look at our phone, and we never have to think critically about those important questions. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's whatever I think. Yeah. Right. Well, because even for you and generations before, maybe now, right, it was always the most important part of your life was to do good, to do the right thing. Like even if you weren't religious or even if you weren't a Christian, right? Now they got all their ethics from a Christian worldview, but right, that it was always to do the right thing. But now, right, the greatest thing you can do is, right, live your truth or kind of live the life you want to live, be free from any sort of bondage of any of that sort, right? That's kind of the goal, which is very flipped, so I'm glad you brought that up. Right, the definition I read from James Johnson, right, it's because what Jesus did, right? It's what God did for us. And it's to embrace the Jesus way, as Ryan would put it, to embrace the kingdom manifesto. He's been talking about that a lot in the Gospel of Luke, right? But that's the kingdom manifesto is a way to live out the gospel, to live out what Jesus did for us, and what he wants us to do for others, right? To see hard places and broken people and to move towards them. So I have some depressing statistics for you, right? So that you don't distract yourself, don't pull out your phone, just listen to the statistics. So according to worldbank.org, 10% of the world, so that's 700 million people, live on less than $1.90 a day, right? So 700 million people live on less than $2 a day. Nearly half, so about 3.5 billion people, live off of less than $5.50 per day, so less than $6 a day. There are more than 400,000 children in foster care in just the U.S. Estimated 153 million children worldwide are orphans, according to sosusa.org. According to endhomelessness.org, 580,000 homeless people in the U.S. alone. 150 million homeless people worldwide, up from 100 million in 2005. Right, so the Millennium Alliance of Humanity and the Biosphere out of Stanford label homelessness yet another emerging global crisis. According to lifewater.org, 1 in every 3 countries listed by the UN as those with the least socioeconomic development are those that have had little Christian influence, which was really interesting. The least developed countries in our world are also actually the least churched countries. And for every 1,000 children born, 39 will die before the age of 5, right, from preventable diseases and malnutrition alone. So kind of as we talked about earlier, the modern Westerner, like us, may choose to avoid uncomfortable topics like this, avoid uncomfortable truths like this, or avoid thinking about the most vulnerable people in our world. Right, we live in a society where it is very easy for us to distract ourselves from some of the horrors people experience in our world, but not only in our world, just a few miles away from us sometimes. Right, but that's not the Jesus way, right? That's not the Christian way. That's not the kingdom manifesto. The Christian way is to understand that there is a purpose in suffering, even if we can't see it. Right, and that's a really important part, right? That's kind of what the book of Job teaches us, right? Even if we can't, with our amazing brains, think of a reason why suffering may be going on, right? That doesn't mean God doesn't have a purpose behind it. The Christian way is to hope for the future and understand that authentic faith drives us out into the dark places of our world, right? To relieve the sufferings of others. That's what authentic faith does, as James would put it. What are some practical ways that we can help the most vulnerable in our society? Empathy, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. We are. We're in the suburbs. right, of Littleton. Um, we're all in the 1% when you're thinking about worldwide, right? We're very blessed to live here in this country, and we're very blessed. So yeah, oftentimes we don't see it. Any other thoughts? Any other practical?
I don't remember if it's been said in this section earlier. Linda talked about visiting those in need who are lonely.
Visiting the people in nursing homes. Right. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, one of the biggest issues for me is it's been talked about a lot. I don't think about it. Right? Sometimes you just don't think about it. And that's why it's so important to think about it and actually do something.
We also have to realize, and somebody's mentioned this already, the biggest problem is separation from God.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever we do should be headed that direction. Are you a fireman? Downtown Denver or Fullerton?
I was downtown. I'm at Colorado and Colfax, kind of by the zoo.
Okay, that counts. I've often thought this through. All right, Mayor Johnston has this plan to house 1,000. Assume that he succeeds in that. And so 1,000 people have got little micro homes or something, former hotel converted to homes. So 1,000 are successfully housed off the street, they have a place to live. The word gets around Detroit, to Minneapolis, to Chicago. Hey, in Denver, they're giving out free housing. So a week later, boom, there's another 1,000 out there. So they do their best and they get those housed, sit back and relax. A week later, another 1,000. I mean, yes, we have to provide housing, but long term, I think the only thing that's going to help, primary help, is when we know God.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I've heard, especially in our modern context, some people, some different missionary groups, right? They'll go out and, right, they come from really wealthy churches. They have lots of money to go with, and they'll go and they'll maybe build them some houses. They'll do some things, but there's no call to follow Jesus. There's no eternal hope offered. There's no, right, man cannot live on bread alone. Right. There needs to be more than just bread that we're going to give. So I think you're exactly right. It's very important. Those things have to go together. Right? We're doing it for a reason. Right. Any other thoughts? Any other practical ways? That's a good question. I think, as you said, Love Inc., those different places. There's a lot of different shelters downtown, tons of them to go volunteer at. I think just keeping it in mind, doing all those different types of things, like supporting different missionaries when they go out. I mean, Corey's going to be going out to Peru. He's going to be doing the exact work I'm talking about here, right? So supporting him in that, I think, would be an important step. Supporting other missionaries, right? Supporting the different organizations that let you sponsor children, right? The different Christian organizations where you can sponsor children worldwide. I know we have one in our men's breakfast. Those are some really good ways to do that. Just to think about it. I mean, some people are living, like as I said, there's like half the world's living on less than $6 a day. So a little bit of money probably goes a long way for them. Any other thoughts before we close in prayer. Mm. It is overwhelming. Hmm. Really good, Mike.
And it is overwhelming. So you just have to sometimes help one person at a time.
Hmm.
Do what you can with what you can.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. And I think I didn't have it down here, but I also read one statistic that was a little less depressing, is actually 75% of charitable giving around the world is actually from religious institutions. Now, that wasn't specifically Christian, but 75%, right, of the world, which is heavily Christian, I assume a big percentage of that, right, 75% is from religious institutions. So to keep that in mind too, right, that another way to help is to church the nations, right? That's another huge way to help, because I think that brings some prosperity, apparently, according to the numbers. Andy. Mm-hmm. Really good. All right, Corey, do you mind praying for us?